Today I would like to share with you my passion for teaching. It's meaningful. It's passing what you received, but it's also bonifying who you are in order to make the others better. It's selfless, but at the same time very rewarding action. Perhaps in the solitude of one's expectation of betterment, as a pianist does when they practice by themselves, there is a sense of not natural sharing, like a string quartet member would do, or other woodwind musicians or singers with an accompanist pianist. It's a dialogue between the score, the music, the meaning, and oneself. And of course, comparison, competition, examples, editions, publishings, a lot of elements. But at the end of it all, no matter how much one learns, there is something that one has to find by oneself, within oneself. Not that there is a spontaneous generation and say, of course, Schubert didn't have a teacher and look how he wrote. I still think that in many ways we learn even if it's not in the official way. We grasp something and we misunderstand something else, and in a way it's very healthy and humbling when you teach, not just to transmit something that you think you know and make you some kind of a specialist, because in a way there is no specialty. It's most of the artistic discipline for a performer or for a composer, any kind of music involvement is ephemeral. He doesn't stay like a painting on a canvas. He doesn't stay like a statue. He doesn't remain on film or like a movie. It is vanished as soon as it happened. And it's like an unperishable perfume that stays in your olfactive memory. And same thing with music teaching. What do you teach? Your experience, of course. But that's, I think, not but overrated. I think you have to be listening so much to the students' eagerness, weakness, hopes. It's like going to a restaurant with an appetite and then trying to eat all and then not being able to digest it all. Music is incredible enticement for those who are sensitive to it, and they want to have this appetite to be able to grasp everything. And so the teacher would be a filter, some kind of a hyphen between the dead composers, mostly played, and the young students wondering how to play them, what it means, and how do you read intelligently the page, understand something between the lines. So perhaps I find that teaching experience most rewarding because I received a lot from my teacher. That is a granted fact. And so I feel like at some point, while we are passing, we need to leave a meaningful mark for those whom we meet. And education of children, education of students, it's not the same. And in any case, it's respect for who they are from the get-go and who they want to become. And you advise, but you don't direct. You organize and you help give them a sense of self-esteem, of comfort zone during the very, very peculiarly fragile and vulnerable stage presentation for which not everybody is made. And it's not a sense of exhibitionism. It's a purposely provocative term I use when you present intimate feelings to another composer's narration, but nevertheless, you are the one to embody it, so to say, through your playing of the piece. And At that point, during that ephemeral moment that is intense, beautifully so, you share something all life long, resumed in the few minutes that you played, in one time through, not like in recording where you can restart and rethink. It has something very much of a very meaningful experience to teach, because when you perform yourself, be it because you're a teacher or because when you play you're not a teacher, the piano, you don't play as a teacher, hopefully. You just play as a player, as a musician, as a person curious and cultivated enough to have received and humble to try to reach the macro and the micro of all what has to be done in order for the piece to just settle well and be there in the right disposition. You don't want to force the trait, you don't want to underperform, you want just to find the right tone. The information through the music, the narration, the silences, the rests, the what makes you in awe in front of the piece. It's not just the man who looks at the man who looks at the beauty, or the woman who relates to what she read in the score and she's playing it for us. And all men and women in music, in fact, we have in more poetry than science, even if a lot of the industry of playing music is to do with technique. And there is no artistry without technique. And art is a recreation of life artificially. But this narration is believable. And the time during which you translate, trying to find the right word, you transmutate from the page to the living music in your own vibrating psyche, and you try not to taint it too much by what it means to you, because you want to present it for what it is. And at the same time, there is no objectivity in that, because you are involved. You cannot be involved and uninvolved at the same time. So inevitably, it means to you so much that you're afraid you're going to mess it up, and you're afraid. That's why most of the stage fright happens, is because you're afraid that all these hours of practice, all this life into this piece of music that you want to serve at its best, is not to betray the piece that you admire so much. Of course, there are many others who perform them if you play famous pieces, and even less famous pieces, because, of course, the repertoire for piano is relatively large, to say the least. But still, even if you play something everybody knows, you go through your path in it. And I think it's fascinating to see how a student enters in this enchanted garden of the piece where you visited younger. And they see things that you didn't see. They don't see things that I saw. And I think this inevitably asymmetrical relation of the person who knows and the person who acquires the knowledge through this exploration of the music, which written in the past is relevant in the present, even if discovered earlier by the teacher compared to the new discovery of the student, because it takes sometimes 3 to 4 revisitations, as I like to say, through life of a musician, because it's like a partner in music. It's like for actors, famous roles, and for opera singers, famous, of course, roles as well. They grow in you, and in a way, you understand them better after you go through them several times through life. But there has to have a beginning. There has to be a first time. And when you work with the students, it's their first time they encounter with this piece. So I don't try to pontificate and say, oh, I'll give you a shortcut so you can avoid all these hurdles and all the mistakes that I made because I thought this, I misunderstood that, my teacher didn't tell me this, I wish they told me, now that I know, I should have done blah, blah, blah. That is a little bit circumvoluted, and I think that is best to just open the ears and discover how it means to them. Sometimes it's a question of tempo, not just the rhythm, the pace, the sense of elegance of how you pace your statement, your narration. And it's interesting to observe how when one is a young musician visiting a masterpiece that is deeply meaningful to oneself, confusingly or clearly why, because with time you analyze, you understand, but first you love, then you try to understand why you love it. Or sometimes the opposite, if the language is very complex, then the curiosity makes you understand it and then you love it after you are puzzled by it. Nothing is self-revealed right away. Of course, a teacher can help to hyphenate that between the music and its mystery, or its to decode the elements. And some students go, aha, and some go, oh. And that's also very rewarding. In fact, while playing in front of an audience oneself as an artist or a concert pianist, on stage, in my case, I feel home. And off stage, sometimes I have fright, but on stage, no. And not arrogant stage presence, it's just that I'm in a jubilant mode, realizing the rarity of the opportunity to be vibrating, serving the piece of music that I love so much. And serving the students for the piece that we love so much. And there is a level of hints you can give to a student about what this piece means. You don't want to spoon feed them and tell them, okay, contextually, yes. You have to explain, show, display examples, and I do love that. I love placing the piece in history of music, not only, but in history itself. And in the history of the composer's style, evolution or not. And it becomes travel in the past, but in the present. And then it's the angst of the student. Will I be ready on time? How will I do technically this? I don't manage to do this. I bump into this. I bump into that. And so, yes, I feel very moved by the self-search of the student. Also, very few, but it's very important to mention, really involve themselves in the practicing procedures. It's a bottomless ocean almost, once you start practicing details after details. And it's easy to get discouraged because whatever you gained might be erased like a sandcastle on the beach, as I like to say. But it is fact that the love for the music, the meaningful connection to the piece, or what the piece's charisma shines over you, and in a way you shine in turn to the audience. It's not you, but as a performer you're the vector. And regardless if audience members think or believe or perceive that your involvement and conviction brings you to appear like it's your music. And I like to think that it's their interpretation, not a copy of my example. That's how I like it. You play it like me. Well, that's because it's wiser and others don't know because I know better. Of course not. My colleagues know better. My competitors know better. My I don't pretend any. But one thing which I find very meaningful is when these students entrust me, and I owe them, I respect them to give them the truth of what I think they should reach for and how to reach it. I mean, this is obvious to every teacher, nothing special. I don't pretend to be special, and I'm just mentioning what I believe are the main reasons for which teaching is such a meaningful experience. There are certain things that the student has to go through themselves with it. You know, after all, it's an educational and pedagogical journey to go through their hurdles themselves too. Giving them shortcuts doesn't solve the fact. Of course, short term, yes, it does, really. There is always a deadline that comes too early. They have enough other things to do and study and yeah, but ultimately, you know, I extract exercises, I make to work on the independence of fingers, on independence of rhythmic patterns, on understanding of how we control the singing portion of the piano, how we control how high the keys go up before they go down, how we control the length of sound if we can, and before the pedal and with the pedal, how we follow, what we hear, how we voice, how we phrase, how we narrate, how we breathe, how we organize the statement, how we define the dynamic markings from the publisher edition compared to the instrument of the time period and its different expectations, or what the composers compensated, like for instance octaves in the left hand, because straight strung pianos didn't have the cross strung pianos of today's richer tone that is homogenized to the whole range of the piano, and so you have to find ways to voice it so that you re-establish the balance which they were afraid they wouldn't have. But if you're not careful, even if you mean well, you might just end up in the exact contrary by trying to be right. Sometimes it's lost in translation, but sometimes you have to also cleverly reorganize it. Of course, the interpretation is today, with all the editions, very locked in some kind of Puritanism, which is not wrong, because there were many, obviously, in reaction to that, then, let's say, early 20th century mostly. Let's say, appropriations of pieces which denatured them by some useless virtuosity. But that was how people loved it then. And they were genuine in their own way. But in interpretations, there are fashions, you know. But authenticity is not an end by itself. We assume we know how they played grace notes, always have the value, or always equalize, but not, but why, but how, but where, by when, but in which area of the, you know. I find that we all forge our own understanding out of all the information we get, and thankfully a lot of it we blend and perhaps even evacuate. But what remains when you teach is that you bring some kind of comfort zone for this vulnerable trip, where they expose themselves when they perform to be seen making a mistake, and that is a problem beyond music. It's just about self-esteem, accepting to show vulnerability, but compensate all the time by a driven involvement in the meaning of it. And so I think that on the passing moment of a performance, a mistake which naturally could happen, and regardless of how much practiced, of course, more practiced, less, but nevertheless, still, que sera sera. I mean, it's not about perfection. It's about organizing the most natural trajectory of the piece narration that you re-establish from the ground up every time after it's vanished, because you just played it and it's gone. And Every time it reveals itself differently to you. And so I discover, rediscover, and the students discover, and they rediscover on their own. And it creates a bond about this honest search of what we can extract best out of ourselves because of these pieces, which, with very little technological means, composers of the past extracted out of themselves, this humanity that they carry in these pieces, the meaning of the world, the Weltschmerz, if it were, or the hope for the humanity. And there is not only music with message. Sometimes the music without message is more important, because it's the music itself the message, just like the music of a language which perhaps you don't speak, you don't understand, but the music of the words then matters to you as much, poetically. We need this kind of daydream because it gives us hope. Somehow we try to understand, what does this baby say when they cry? And what does this student mean when they say, I don't know how to do that? It's not just the know-how, it is, but not only. I refuse that and only figuring solves things, but sometimes it's really rewarding when you help little things, little details that will bring the cultivated playing to appear. And then they will do the rest by themselves, because in a way you just give them the hint, you don't give them the solution, because anyway it's their own to build. Sometimes you find that each student is a mystery to solve for the teacher. And I'm very aware of how precious each moment of their lives is. And I try to do my best to bring them all my attention and thoughts while I'm working with them. And I find that we're passing, they will blossom, and they will pass in turn what they received, or how they perceived of what they received, and that's fine. I find that chain of humanity very beautiful, because the effort is meaningful, the talent and the drive could be born with and acquired as well. And then the sense of, at any level of difficulty, is to find the power, the force of grace. And in total abnegation, accept to rethink everything from the ground up, rethink from outside the box, and not come there with a student with only your assertive thoughts. Doubt is healthy, but transmission of a driven meaning, it's more about teaching, connecting the dots between things that the student has either guessed by their intuition and their gift, or has to verbalize themselves to understand how things organize themselves, like in the tonal system or in the projection of a style, or how that becomes subtly different between Schubert and Schumann and Chopin and Liszt, and they all lived almost at the same time, but what does it mean? They're also different. A common language with a tonal system, but different ways of expressing it. And how do you show this in a display on an instrument that universally can play through the piano so many styles, or evoke them more, if not only, yeah. Oh, I have so much to share. I had so much that I received. Glad to be of service.